Imagine waking up to find that the open-source world just dropped a frontier-level AI model. No teaser, no warning, no hype campaign. 1 minute, everything looked business as usual. The next, the entire AI community was in shock. That's exactly what happened with DeepSeek V3.1. Out of nowhere, this model landed on Hugging Face, and within hours, people realized what they were looking at wasn't just another research release. It was something that went head-to-head with GPT-5 itself. 685 billion parameters, a 128,000 token context window, benchmarks that beat Claude Opus 4, and costs that run 68 times cheaper. That combination didn't just bend expectations, it destroyed them. And in this video, we're going to break down what V3.1 really means. Not just for developers and researchers, but for the entire global AI ecosystem. Let's start with the numbers, because the numbers alone explain why the community froze in disbelief. DeepSeek V3.1 comes in at 685 billion parameters, putting it firmly in the class of models we call frontier scale. That's the kind of scale usually reserved for labs with billions in funding and access to the best hardware clusters in the world. But raw parameter count wasn't the only story. The 128,000 token context window was just as jaw-dropping. For perspective, that's around 100,000 to 160,000 Chinese characters, roughly 1/6 of A Dream of Red Mansions, one of the longest and most complex novels in Chinese literature. Most models choke on that kind of input, either slowing to a crawl or losing accuracy. But V3.1 didn't. It handled massive blocks of text and delivered results with both speed and precision. This wasn't just scaling, this was scaling with optimization. What really set the internet on fire was the ADER programming benchmark. Claude Opus 4 had been comfortably sitting at the top of those rankings. Then DeepSeek V3.1 landed with a 71.6% score, pushing just past Claude. That might sound like a modest gap, but in this space it's massive, because V3.1 isn't a closed, premium model hidden behind an expensive API. It's open source. And developers didn't need to imagine what that meant in practice. They tested it. The same coding task that would cost $70 on a closed platform. On V3.1, it ran for about $1. Now, if you're a solo developer, that's exciting. But if you're a startup running thousands of daily tasks, or an enterprise processing workflows at scale, that's the kind of gap that completely rewrites your budget planning. Andrew Christensen, an AI researcher, put it bluntly: 71.6% on ADER, 1% above Claude Opus 4, and 68 times cheaper. That isn't abstract. That's cold, hard, real-world math. A lot of people underestimate how big a deal 128K tokens of context really is. GPT-4 Turbo, for example, capped out at 128K, but would bog down on complex reasoning tasks. Claude 3 Opus famously pushed to 200K, but practical use often ran into hallucinations or degraded performance on long-form tasks. DeepSeek V3.1, though, it didn't slow down. Developers threw massive texts at it, from research datasets to full novels. And while the model could realistically manage about 1/10 of that volume, the results stayed accurate and fast. That consistency is rare. Historically, reasoning-heavy models tend to stumble under load, but V3.1 ripped through those same tasks with near-instant responses. It raised a simple but unsettling question: what exactly did DeepSeek do differently under the hood? The answer lies in the hybrid architecture. Now, hybrid models aren't new. Many teams have tried combining reasoning, chatting, and coding into one model. Most of those attempts ended in disappointment. Models that were decent at each task but exceptional at none. DeepSeek flipped the script. With V3.1, hybrid roles actually work together. Instead of separate reasoning and base models, everything is consolidated into a single flagship system. The old R1 reasoning label, gone. Everything defaults to V3.1, no fragmentation, no multiple flavors to choose from. And then came the discovery that lit up forums everywhere. Hidden tokens buried in the weights. Put simply, V3.1 can literally think internally before giving you an answer. And if connected, it can even fetch data from the web. That's the dream people have been waiting for. Native reasoning plus native search in one open source package. V3.1 didn't just shine in coding. On SVGBench, which tests visual and structural reasoning, it landed just behind GPT 4.1 Mini, far surpassing DeepSeek's earlier R1. On MMLU, the standard benchmark for broad language understanding, it held its ground against GPT-5. Now, yes, GPT-5 still pulled ahead on graduate-level Q&A and advanced software engineering. But the fact that an open model was even in the same conversation, that's unprecedented. Even in tricky logical comparisons, like choosing between 9.11 and 9.9, V3.1 got it right, showing it was less prone to those infamous numerical slip-ups that plague other models. The conclusion was inescapable. This wasn't just another release. This was a frontier-level system, freely available to anyone. But let's zoom out, because the economics of this release might be even more disruptive than the technology itself. Closed AI development is a capital-intensive game. You pour hundreds of millions into R&D, compliance, data centers, and talent. And then you recoup those costs through high API pricing. DeepSeek flipped that model upside down. By releasing V3.1 openly, they created a dynamic where enterprises will now ask a very uncomfortable question. Why pay premium rates for closed systems when an open one is nearly as good and costs a fraction to run? It's the same disruption we saw with Linux. Once the free version was good enough, the paid alternatives suddenly had to justify their existence. This isn't the first time DeepSeek rattled the industry. Back in January, when they unveiled the original V3, they revealed that training had cost just $5.6 million, running on around 2,000 slower NVIDIA GPUs. In a world where people assumed frontier training required hundreds of millions, that revelation alone wiped $600 billion off NVIDIA's market cap in a single day. Governments scrambled to ban DeepSeek's chatbot over fears that user data would end up on Chinese servers. But with V3.1, things are different. This isn't just a chatbot. It's a full frontier model released to the world. And the timing? Ruthless. OpenAI had just unveiled GPT-5. Anthropic had rolled out Claude 4, both heavily marketed, both locked behind APIs, both premium priced. DeepSeek chose that exact moment to upload V3.1, quietly, freely, without fanfare. The message couldn't be clearer. While American companies guard their frontier models like national secrets, DeepSeek treats its frontier model as public infrastructure. That strategy isn't random. It's baked into China's national AI roadmap. Back in 2020, the country's 14th five-year plan explicitly prioritized open-source AI, aiming to accelerate global adoption by giving away advanced models, even at the cost of short-term profits. And it's working. Hugging Face's trending list has been dominated by Chinese releases lately. Within hours, V3.1 shot into the top 5. The developer community's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Hugging Face's head of product, Victor Mustar, tweeted, "Open source AI is at its peak." On Reddit, people noticed subtle but powerful changes. The think button from earlier versions was gone. Outputs were longer, more coherent, more detailed. Benchmarks looked stronger than expected. And all this before DeepSeek even published the official model card. V3.1 wasn't just released, it was adopted instantly. Of course, there are caveats. The full model is around 700 gigabytes. That means most people won't run it locally anytime soon. But cloud providers are already preparing hosted versions, which means those limits will evaporate quickly. And once enterprises can spin up hosted V3.1 instances at scale, the pricing pressure on closed models is going to intensify. Here's why this matters. For the first time, smaller teams are proving they can build frontier-scale models without spending hundreds of millions. The myth that only the largest US labs could compete at the edge shattered. Now, countries, companies, and even individual developers have access to tools that rival the best in the world. For American firms, exclusivity is no longer the moat. If open-source models can match performance and run cheaper, then the value of closed systems will have to come from trust, integrations, or enterprise partnerships. And that brings us to a bigger irony. For years, the artificial part of artificial intelligence wasn't the intelligence. It was the scarcity, the locked gates, the high prices, the restrictions. DeepSeek just proved that scarcity was never necessary. So when people call this release disruptive, they're not exaggerating. 685 billion parameters, a 128K token context window, benchmarks that beat Claude Opus 4, a cost structure that makes closed models look outdated. And all of it dropped online without warning. DeepSeek V3.1 didn't just raise the bar for open source AI, it reset expectations entirely. And if this is just the path toward V4, then the real shockwaves are still ahead. That's it for this one. I want to know what you think. Is DeepSeek V3.1 the future of open AI development? Or is there still a moat for closed models like GPT-5 and Claude 4? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Make sure you hit to subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.